In this video, I wanted to tell you a little bit about where I'm coming from. The reasons why I've reached these conclusions are, it has a lot to do with my experience in this dimension, from the time I was a kid all the way up through, up until now. And I've already talked about, I've already had a video about how the human body and just this dimension itself is just, it's very obviously existential crime. And that's again, to reiterate, that's the main purpose of these videos, is to communicate that it is very obviously existential crime being committed here, and that the person that controls this dimension knows very well that that's what it is. And so this will probably be the longest video that I have, just because so much horrible stuff has happened to me, and I'll try to. I'll leave some stuff out, but I'll try to just try to stay on topic. But like I said, there's a lot of different stuff that's happening. If you look at the context, which you don't always realize at the time, but if you look at the context, if you look back, back on the past, it becomes very obvious what has happened. Put it briefly, it is obvious that this lifetime, from the time I was born up until this point, was curated, was controlled, it was planned by somebody that had extremely psychopathic intentions, that they deliberately wanted to have a negative effect on my existence, that they knew it was existential crime, and it is absolutely an attempt to cover up the crimes that have been committed against me already before this lifetime even started, and the ones that have been committed against me in this life. And so that's very briefly. Now, once I tell the story about where I'm coming from and how this life has come about, you'll be able to see why these conclusions were reached. And, if you're honest and intelligent, I don't see how you could come to any other conclusion. It's so... I grew up about a 4-hour drive north of Salt Lake City. I grew up in East Idaho in a little town called Rigby. That's Mormon country. And, nowadays Mormons are actually pretty nice people. I don't have any problems with Mormons in general, but at that time it was before the internet, it was before cell phones. It was a bad place to be. Mormons, if you look at the Mormon story, again, I'm not trying to bash Mormons or anything like that, but the truth is that their story about their history is totally different from everyone else's story. Everyone else says that they got chased out of everywhere that they lived, because they were engaged in polygamy and marrying 12-year-old girls and having like 10, 15, 20 wives. The founder, Joseph Smith, supposedly had 50 wives himself, and so and people weren't okay with it. Even back then, marrying a 12-year-old girl was just not okay. And the United States government made it, let them know, you can't be doing that. What is wrong with you? And so they moved west outside of the United States government's borders to where they could do whatever they wanted, where nobody could see what they were doing. And so this is where I grew up. And again, the United States government eventually expanded over there. The Mormons at first said, well, we'll fight you for our religious freedoms. And so the U.S. government said, okay. And they sent the U.S. Army there. And then all of a sudden, they said, oh, wait, we just had a revelation from God. And he said that it's cool for us to stop doing this. We're doing it because we decided that that's the case, not, because the U.S. Army is camped outside, And so this is the place where I grew up, and it was a place, Rigby, all of the non-Mormons there, it was probably 90% Mormon. My mother is not Mormon. My dad is. His side of the family, they're LDS. Latter-day Saints is what they call themselves. Pretty much, because my mother was not Mormon, she would not allow us to be raised Mormon. Me and my siblings. And so we were in the 10% or something like that of that area that were not Mormon, and we were treated pretty poorly, especially when we were younger. It's there was a lot of prejudice against us. People, little kids would tell us as little kids that we were going to burn in hell and terrible stuff like that. You know what I mean? There was horrific corruption in the legal system. Like the Mormons could do horrible things, and like I said, the kind of people that started the Mormon Church were sexual deviants. They were people that married 12-year-old kids. And when I was a kid, child molestation was still a big thing. And when that corruption that controlled the legal system, they would just have their bishop go and talk to the judge, and it would go away in a lot of cases. And there's actually a pretty famous case that happened just a few years ago. So it still happened. Something like 5 or 10 years ago. There was a guy named Judge Moss there who let off this rich contractor for molesting all of his kids, all of his grandkids. Uh, there was some sort of, from what I understand, there was some sort of bestiality involved too with the dog. Horrible, disgusting, despicable stuff. And this judge gave him 6 months in a program, 10 years of parole. To give you context, I had a friend who was 19 and he was dating a 17 and 3/4 year old girlfriend. And because they were sleeping together, he got, this was 20 years ago or something like that, he got a year, I think, a year in jail and longer. He got a worse sentence for sleeping with somebody like a year and 3 months younger than him for statutory rape than this guy did for molesting all of his grandkids. And so this is not something that is an urban myth or anything like that. This is something that has been in the news. It is absolutely, for certain, part of that culture in Rigby, Idaho. It's a lot of people have moved in, so it's the demographics have kind of changed. But this is the place where I grew up in, just to give you some background of whoever controls this dimension, that's where he decided that I would grow up. And I remember thinking, even when I was a kid, even being 3, 4 years old, barely old enough to remember anything, I remember looking around at a group of people and thinking, what is wrong with these people? I shouldn't be here. I remember thinking that. I remember thinking that many times throughout my childhood, that I should not, that this is wrong. This dimension is not the way that it should be. Now, I had a pretty bad childhood. I'm sure a lot of people had worse. I'm not trying to brag or anything stupid like that, but it was a bad childhood. Eventually, and there was a lot of bad kids in Rigby. There was a lot of kids rebelled against Rigby. Even pretty much all the Mormons and a lot of the people who were Mormons all admitted that Rigby was just a terrible place. It was not a good place. It was eventually, when I was about 16 years old or 15, I got caught drinking. And that's what a lot of kids will do when they rebel. And so I ended up getting put on probation with a woman who was notorious for having sex with all of her underage probationers, or as many as would touch that disgusting person. And she had control of my life at that point, and she did despicable, horrible, mind-fucking, terrible things to me. At one point when I was 16, they railroaded me. They called me into court, and I had no idea what I was there for. I had no representation, and they tried to commit me to the state. Now, there were no violent crimes, no theft, no vandalism, nothing. I had a drinking charge, there was a couple of marijuana charges. They tried to put me in jail when I was 15 or 16 until I was 21 years old because of drinking and smoking marijuana a couple times. And they tried to railroad me, and I had to actually represent myself and cross-examine my own parents in a court of law. Judge Kennedy was the judge who was overseeing it. Um, and so when it became obvious that they couldn't railroad me, that they didn't have any case, Judge Kennedy wrote it off. And eventually, I moved from Rigby to Idaho Falls, which is about 20 miles away, which is a much bigger area. Still predominantly Mormon at that time, but it was much better than Rigby. And so I went to school there. I graduated from Idaho Falls High School, and I actually graduated a little bit early because I wanted to get out of that place. It was a terrible situation. And at that time, because of the fact that I had a record for drinking, which at the time seemed really terrible, being from that area. I understand now in other places like people just wouldn't care, but at the time I felt like I didn't have a lot of options, and a lot of my friends were joining the Army, the United States Army. There were 5 of us actually that all joined the Army from the same class. Well, one was a year older, and so I signed up in the United States Army, and that is that is one of the crookedest organizations in this dimension. It's in a way they're child molesters too. They take advantage of children. They lie to children to trick them into signing a contract. Then as soon as you get to basic training, they use and abuse and torment and just try to break you down as a person. They try to traumatize you. They try to subjugate you as a person. And if you tell them no, they threaten to put you in federal prison because of the contract that you signed. Now they say, oh, well, you have 6 months to decide. Well, you keep trying to tough through it and go, oh, well, as soon as I actually get to my job, as soon as I actually get to the real everyday life in the Army, it'll be different, and this is just like an initiation or whatever. By the time you get there, you realize it's a good old boy system. It's a crooked system, top to bottom. It's about subjugation altogether. There's no real point in having any kind of armies. In the world, it's this dimension is created by somebody that deliberately has this situation in effect. It's I got sent to Iraq. I actually saw what was happening in real life and how it was different from what was happening on the television. I saw that there was such a complete dichotomy between the truth and what the United States government claimed was the truth, that I saw it was not about freedom, it was not about protecting the country, it was not about any of the stuff that they sold us. It was not about anything like that. While I was there, and this is a big part of my life, I mention this because it's, well, you'll see. While I was there, I witnessed some really serious corruption that the United States government committed. It's a long story. I actually wrote a book about it. You can buy this book if you want. It doesn't, I don't receive any money for it. They just charge you whatever it costs to print the book up and then whatever it costs to ship it to you. So I never see a single penny. They don't even have my bank account information. It's on Book Vault. It's called Mind Rape, the Preferred Weapon of the United States Government by Michael Levi Lundquist. So I wrote a book about this whole situation to where, because I wrote an entire book, I won't go into all the details. I've already I did go into the details on a separate YouTube channel years ago, also not monetized, also no money involved, there's no reason I would be telling you this at all unless it were true, and it is. It's so in this YouTube channel I outlined this, but the brief story is I discovered that they killed my squad leader, Sergeant Lee Totticini, and it looked like it was under extremely suspicious circumstances. He's a member of the Navajo Nation. In fact, his uncle was the vice president of the Navajo Nation at the time. And so it seemed like at the time that it was some sort of political maneuver, like, oh, they killed one of our own, and so So now we're in it. So now, they're the enemy or something like that. And so you have to support this war. At the time, the war was not very popular. And so I tried to gather evidence because it was, he died from friendly fire. And I knew that. I was the medic that showed up on the scene. I was the person, I had to do everything when I was there. They used me like a donkey. I did the work of three different people. And they didn't want to let me leave, even though there was terrible heat there. And we were wearing 60 pounds of gear, and we were uh, drinking this mineral water with this Arabic writing on there, some generic stuff. A ton of people there started having kidney stones, and I already had kidney stones from before, and so I started passing them left and right, and I started passing them as basically every 3 to 5 days. Is how much I passed them, but they didn't want to let me go because I was doing all this work for them, and I told them like, I can't treat a patient while I'm passing a kidney stone. You send me outside the gates twice a day, 4 hours in the morning, 4 hours at night to go out with the scouts. Scouts are a great bunch of guys to be with, no problems with them. That was a good place to be. But I had so much other work to do in the meantime. Most people, that was all they would do, is just do an 8 hour, shift, 4 hours in the morning, 4 hours at night. But me, I had to do all kinds of different stuff. I was in charge of medical supply for the whole battalion task force. I had to drive the 5 ton that carried all these supplies. I had to be the guy who helped the mechanics fix this POS. Anyway, I had to do all this different stuff. So they wouldn't let me leave. Well, eventually, I saw a doctor that did let me leave, that did let me go home. I saw a National Guard urologist in, where was that? Landstuhl, I think it was. And I saw this guy, and he said, "You were passing him this much? Yeah, you're not going back. You're done. You're not going to go back." And so he sent me back to the unit. Now, when I got to the unit, I wanted to leave. I wanted to get out of the Army. I was done with it. I'd already signed this contract, had been used and abused ruthlessly, pitilessly. Well, I did really well. I gave them really good work. I gave them far more than they ever gave me. And so I'd already fulfilled, 3 years and, boy, 6 months or something. So I said, look, if you're not going to send me to Iraq, just send me home. You guys can get a replacement because I'll be off your books. Just send me home. Well, they wouldn't do that. They just made me stick around for no reason, it seemed like at the time. And now with my perspective that I have, that this dimension is created by somebody who's deliberately making terrible things come about for me, I can see that this was staged as well. And so uh, as soon as I got back to the unit, I found out that they had lied to Sergeant Todicini's family. They had told him that he had died in an ambush, that the enemy had killed him. And I knew that that wasn't true. Like I said, I was I was the medic on site. I had seen everything. I had spoken to the people who were there. I knew exactly what had happened. I knew it from first-hand accounts, that I spoke to them immediately after it took place. And so I went about trying to gather evidence about it. And one of the things I could think of is I thought, well, I had a journal that I wrote on this laptop that I use for Army medical supply. And so I contacted my platoon members in Iraq, and I said, hey, I was hoping you could send me this email, this journal in an email. And they were literally like a 2 or 3 minute walk away from where the computer tent was, where they had the internet. And it was a text file, it literally would have taken them probably less than 5 minutes, to actually do this. And these are people I was just in combat with. These are people that I was friends with, And at first they said, yeah, sure. And then all of a sudden, all communication stopped. It cut off. And At the same time, the people who were in charge, they call it rear detachment, or rear D is what they call it. People back on rear detachment who were in charge there, the acting commander and the acting first sergeant, they started treating me extremely hostile. And I started getting really scared because I could see what was happening, that it was obvious corruption. If you do something like that, it might actually be considered treason. The penalty for treason is death. And so these people would do anything to cover it up. And so I started being really afraid. Long story short, they came up with a ridiculous excuse to kick me out of the Army. Now, by the time they actually kicked me out, I had already done the full 4 years that I'd already signed up for. I signed up for 4 years. They made me stay for another 4 months after that, so they could find some ridiculous excuse to kick me out of the Army. And that's what they did. And they did it in such a way that it denied me my GI Bill, the money for college that I signed up in the Army to do that. The only reason I signed up in the Army was to get the GI Bill. That's the only way, the only reason. And they did it in a way that was, I actually appealed to the Army Review Board, and the Army Review Board admitted it was, I quote, against Army regulations and improper separation from the Army. They lied and broke all the rules in order to kick me out after they'd made me a slave for 4 months after my 4-year enslavement. And but before they kicked me out, when it became clear that I was finally going to leave, I had a certain period of time to, they call it clearing the base, where you go to all these different, departments on base. You know, you go to medical and dental, and you hand in all of your gear, and you have people sign off and say, yes, this guy doesn't owe us any money, and he's turned in all this stuff and everything like that. One of those things is dental. You have to go to dental. And so I, didn't have any trouble with my teeth. I thought they would just give me a checkup, and I, would leave, and I could go finish doing all the stuff that I needed to do to get out of there. Well, this Army dentist looked like a really nasty, terrible person. And he looked at me, and he looked at my x-rays and said, the chamber in your rearmost tooth on the left side looks a little irregular, and it might be that your nerve is eating away at your enamel, and so I'm going to give you a root canal. And I said, I don't have any pain. I don't have any symptoms. I don't have any trouble. Just let me go. I'm going to be out of the Army. You don't have to worry about me. You don't have to spend the time. You don't have to spend the money. You don't have to do anything like that. And he said, well, if you refuse, then I'll give you a court-martial for disobeying a direct order. And so they muscled me into giving me a root canal. Well, more on that in a moment. After I got out of the Army, I had terrible suffering. I felt like I wasn't in control of my emotions. That it was every time that I started getting happy, it was like somebody intervened and caused horrible suffering for me. And it was, I figured that it was just because I'd been wronged so terribly, and I'd been used so terribly by the United States Army, that after all the stuff that they had done to me, I, thought that I was just understandably angry, Well, at some point, this tooth that they had given me a root canal in started bothering me really bad. It gave me really terrible pain. I was having headaches from this tooth. I eventually, I can't remember if I paid for it out of pocket or if I waited until I found a job that had benefits. I think I waited till I had a job with benefits to where I could actually go and get this taken care of. And so I told him what the dentist told me, word for word, basically. And the civilian dentist they thought that was absolutely bizarre. They took x-rays of it, they looked at it, they took the filling out, because they just gave me a root canal. They didn't do anything else. They just gave me a root canal. And, I didn't really know it at the time, but it makes sense now that if you drill a hole in somebody's mouth in their tooth and kill that tooth, you can't just leave a dead tooth in somebody's mouth the way that it is. You just can't be like, see ya, you're good now. But that's exactly what they did. And they told me that this filling, they quote, didn't even look like a filling. And so I thought that it was maybe this guy was friends with somebody who was implicated in this corruption or something, and they were trying to make me suffer one more time out the door, or whatever. I thought maybe that was what it was. Well, as soon as this tooth was pulled, they had to just yank the tooth out. As soon as this tooth was pulled, it was the suffering went away. And I went into this stage of actual, I started getting in shape again, and I started lifting weights. At one point, I was, pretty muscular at some point. Girls liked me. There was, I was getting along with people. It was, things were starting to look really good again. And at some point, there were some things that happened that made me kind of, for whatever reason, I decided that I was going to try to report this again and try to get a hold of Sergeant Totticini's family and let them know the truth about what had happened. And as soon as that happened, my whole life got turned upside down. There was this suffering started again overnight. I woke up one day and felt like I had to learn how to speak again. I had to adjust my gait. My body felt like it was somebody else's. And I just felt horrible. I felt terrible. I felt wrong. I felt like I couldn't figure out what the deal was. I thought maybe I had like a mild stroke or something like that. I didn't know what the problem was, but I didn't have the kind of benefits where I could go see a neurologist or something like that, and so I didn't. I just kind of went on about my life, but my whole life just got turned upside down. I was in the middle of a semester at college, and I went from being a nuclear engineering student with straight A's to in the middle of the semester, they just plummeted. And I ended up getting a Bachelor of Science in Biology, and so it was, I saw a marked difference in my intelligence and my abilities and all these different things. And there was this really weird thing that started happening. People started harassing me out of the blue. I had no idea who these people were. I'd never seen them before. People would try to run me off the road. There was all of these absolutely bizarre and unexplainable things that were done to me. And I'm a nice guy. I am certainly a lot more guarded, and I'm not as happy or friendly as I used to be, for certain, because of what I'm describing to you, actually. And so all this terrible stuff happening, I couldn't really explain it. And all of my attempts to contact Sergeant Totticini's family met with just bizarre problems. Like, I would find one of his relatives on Facebook, and I would type up a message and I would send it to him, and then my computer just wouldn't send it. The internet was fine, everything else was fine, Facebook was working fine, every other website was working fine. It just wouldn't do it. I did a lot of things to try to get a hold of Sergeant Totticini's family, and it never worked out. It never worked at all. And so it was nightmarish. It was absolutely nightmarish. And one day I discovered this thing called iboga, which is a plant from Africa. And this plant is used for PTSD, among other things, And I figured that I would take this plant. It's not legal in the United States, so I had to go down to Costa Rica to take it. And so I figured I would take this plant uh, to try to fix these problems that these counselors and doctors and therapists and antidepressants. None of this stuff worked for whatever was happening to me, and so I went down to Costa Rica and I took iboga, and it changed my life. It felt like something, like a switch flipped.